We have to begin with the coronavirus. As cases and hospitalizations skyrocket nationwide, shattering grim records ahead of the holiday season. More than 150,000 infections were reported across the country yesterday. Earlier on CBS This Morning, Dr. Anthony Fauci warned Americans to double down on the basics like mask wearing, hand washing, and social distancing as cases spike.
You know, our baseline of infections all along has never gone down to a level that would allow you to be easily controllable when you get cases that soar up for a variety of reasons. Right now, as we are in the cool season of the fall and soon to enter the cold season of the winter, that makes it very problematic because people out of necessity will be congregating indoors more than outdoors. This is a particular issue as we're approaching the holiday season of Thanksgiving.
I've heard you say the cavalry is coming, but it doesn't mean you put down your weapons and that people are letting their guards down.
That is absolutely correct.
People are letting their guards down.
You know, it's understandable. I don't want to be critical of that, but we want to just plead with them to understand the dynamics of this outbreak. If you do that, we'll continue to soar. If we do the things that are simple public health measures, that soaring will level and start to come down. You add that to the help of a vaccine, we can turn this around. It is not futile.
President-elect Joe Biden is already holding a major series of meetings with his coronavirus advisory board. He's also pushing for a new stimulus deal by the end of the year as the pandemic continues to grip the U.S. economy. Now, this comes as CBS News projects Joe Biden winning Arizona and the state's 11 electoral votes, further cementing his projected victory. Mr. Biden now has 290 electoral votes while we await the final results from Georgia and North Carolina. However, this is not stopping President Trump from forging ahead with lawsuits and legal challenges in several states as he refuses to concede. Paula Reid has the latest from the White House.
Well, several advisors to President Trump say he is increasingly aware that he just cannot litigate his way to 270 electoral votes, but he wants to be seen as a fighter so he can continue to fundraise and pay down campaign debt. Now, last night, the president-elect Joe Biden's incoming chief of staff, he sat down for an interview where he laid out the risks of continuing to delay this transition.
In his first interview since being named President-elect Joe Biden's chief of staff, Ron Klain warned the Trump administration's refusal to cooperate in the transfer of power will soon begin to have real impacts.
We're in a COVID crisis. Right now, there are officials inside the Department of Health and Human Services who are busy planning a vaccination campaign for the months of February and March when Joe Biden will be president. And so the sooner we can get our transition experts into meetings with the folks who are planning that vaccination campaign, the more seamless the transition from a Biden presidency to a Trump presidency can be.
But like his boss, Klain was optimistic about being able to work with Republicans.
He's spoken to some Republican senators, some Republican governors. I'm not going to go into the names. He has not spoken, though, to Senator McConnell. They'll have a working relationship when the time comes.
President Trump's refusal to concede is, among other things, blocking President-elect Biden from getting access to classified intelligence briefings during the transition period. Klain said he was encouraged by the growing number of Republicans who say that Biden should at least get that access, including the president's allies like Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz.
For the sake of protecting the country, you want whoever is going to assume that office to be aware of the significant threats, because the first responsibility of any president is to keep the American people safe.
Some Republicans say the briefing should wait until all the votes are counted or recounted.
Let's finish counting the votes, and there'll be plenty of time.
He's not president right now. Don't know if he'll be president January 20th, but whoever is, will get the information.
This morning, China reached out to President-elect Joe Biden, becoming the most recent major country to do so, but it's been nearly a week since the election has been called. Now, notably, Russia has not reached out to the incoming president. Historically, these countries have usually waited until the loser concedes before reaching out to the new president-elect. But as we've seen, President Trump appears to have no plans to admit defeat. Anne-Marie, Vlad.
All right, Paula, thank you so much. So for more on this, let's bring in CBSN political contributor and Associated Press White House reporter Zeke Miller. Zeke, let's start things off with the latest on the transition process, especially as President Trump continues to press ahead with lawsuits challenging the result of this election.
Yeah, we're waiting for GSA, the General Services Administration, to do what's called ascertainment. They have to essentially declare Biden the apparent winner. That's what statute says, and they are holding off. And they say they indicated they will continue to hold off until either the president drops his challenges, which could be for several weeks, or until the Electoral College meets in the middle of next month. That could have very real impacts on the pace of the transition. Though Joe Biden has said, he thinks it can go on, on parallel track without those government resources. But as we heard from the incoming Chief of Staff, Ron Klain, there are some very real consequences. Biden's teams of professionals cannot begin to do what's called agency review and go into the Trump administration, meet with the experts there, and develop their plans and to integrate them for a seamless transition. And also, we know that the president-elect has not been able to receive the presidential daily briefing and other intelligence briefings that are normal for a president-elect. So that could have a consequence as well.
So, Zeke, let me ask you. The president is challenging the vote count in several states. He keeps tweeting misinformation to his millions of followers. There are reports from you and others that he's potentially exploring some kind of a media channel, perhaps when he leaves office, or that he's even considering running again in 2024. I guess my question is, what are you hearing from the White House as to the job that he has right now, before January 20th? As coronavirus infections spike, as we see surges across the country, we haven't seen the president except for that brief moment during the Veterans Day memorial, where he laid a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. He's not participating in apparently any coronavirus task force meetings. He's not speaking to the American people about ways that they can protect themselves and their loved ones as we get closer to Thanksgiving. He's basically, according to the reports that I've read, holed up in the White House, making phone calls to cronies, watching television. He's not doing the job that he has right now. So why does he want to be president for another 4 years, let alone in 2024? What are you hearing about that, if you're hearing from anybody in the White House?
It's a real challenge because the White House right now has been kind of hollowed out. A combination of aides still smarting over the election results, and also there are a large number of people around the president who have either come down with the coronavirus or are quarantining from exposure to senior staff, like the chief of staff and others around him. So there's not a whole lot going on in the West Wing to begin with. And in terms of what's happening around the president, he's going to get a briefing today on the vaccine development timeline. But that is the first substantive bit of work he has done, other than that Veterans Day wreath laying that we've been able to see. It's interesting because the president is essentially abdicating what is the most powerful tool that an incumbent president has in a situation like this, or in any situation, which is the fact that they have the job that they are trying to keep. And we know that the president really only has one speed here, and he's fighting to save the job that is already lost. But he's essentially by not. He's ceding the playing field to the president-elect now. Joe Biden, we've seen give a couple of substantive addresses. He took questions from reporters earlier this week. He's looking more like the incumbent than the actual occupant of the Oval Office right now. It's a very interesting dynamic as this transition is playing out.
Zeke, I think what many people are even more concerned about, over and above the president's continued legal challenges, is the reaction from Republicans that almost none of them, very few of them, have actually acknowledged President-elect Biden as the winner of this election. And some of them are actually supporting the president's claims of widespread voter fraud. So former President Barack Obama is sort of weighing in on some of this. He did an interview with 60 Minutes with Scott Pelley. I want to play some of that sound, and then we'll talk afterwards.
What are these false claims of widespread election fraud doing to our country right now?
They appear to be motivated in part because the president doesn't like to lose and never admits loss. I'm more troubled by the fact that other Republican officials who clearly know better are going along with this, are humoring him in this fashion. It is one more step in delegitimizing not just the incoming Biden administration, but democracy generally. And that's a dangerous path.
So, Zeke, in recent days, there have been some Republican lawmakers that have voiced concerns about Joe Biden not having access to these really important intelligence briefings, including, surprisingly enough, Lindsey Graham, who said that he had dedicated, hundreds of thousands of dollars to the president's legal attacks on the system. But I'm wondering what you are hearing behind the scenes, because we have learned that sometimes members of the Republican Party say one thing behind the scenes, but it's different once they're in front of the camera. What are you hearing from certain members of the Republican Party as we sort of inch closer and closer to some key dates in finalizing and certifying the vote count?
No one thinks that this is going to change the outcome of the election. The president's legal efforts, that is, it is possible that, like every recount and examination of votes, there are some votes that were mistallied and move a couple hundred votes one way or the other. Nothing that will get at the nearly 250,000 votes margin that the president would need to flip across all of these key battleground states to win the White House. No Republican thinks that. What they are sort of doing is indulging the president, who doesn't want to admit defeat and is probably never going to. And they're both worried, as we have seen over the last 4 years. They're worried about getting on his wrong side because they don't want to be on the other end of the tweet. They're also mindful of their own further political ambitions, whether they're trying to hold on to those Senate seats down in Georgia, and they want to keep the Republican base unified around the president, who's still the titular head of the party. They don't want to divide Republicans and the president's loyalists on one side and sort of more mainstream Republicans who acknowledge reality on the other. So they're going to humor him, as President Obama said, as long as they possibly can. At a certain point, though, that's they're buying time. They're running out of runway on this. December 14th is the drop dead date for the Electoral College, and Donald Trump is not going to win that vote, and we all know that. They all know that. So they're playing for time right now, and there's not a whole lot of it left.
And Zeke, we mentioned the coronavirus pandemic, which continues to grip the country. We're seeing the spike in cases, hospitalizations, fears of a second shutdown. Congress hasn't made any progress on passing a new stimulus bill to help struggling Americans. So given the fact that we've already sort of talked about that the president of the United States seemingly has checked out when it comes to protecting the American people in this pandemic, what are you hearing about the president-elect's plans, considering that he still hasn't spoken with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell?
We know that he spoke with the Democratic leadership the other day, and they talked about potentially doing something in the lame duck. That just sort of seems to be one of those things that every lawmaker will say when there's a crisis. Let's try to get it done as soon as possible. The reality of the situation in Washington does seem to be that without any leadership on this issue from the White House side, there's not a whole lot of motivation in either party to try to hash this out during the lame duck. That most of any substance will have to wait until after the new administration, the new Congress is sworn in next year. That's unfortunate for the millions of people who are relying on this sort of help and the government help. That a lot of it expired months ago, and they've been struggling since then. And now we're seeing new surges. We have not seen substantive real communications from the White House, from public health experts about what people should do about these troubling signs. We've heard some comments about the vaccine. We have not seen sort of even the full rollout plan for the vaccines once they're available. So it seems that Washington right now is kind of in this big holding pattern, both until there is an emergency approval potentially of a vaccine in the next couple of weeks, but also just until the new Congress and the new president are sworn in January.
Yeah, it's a good point that you make, Zeke, about the holding pattern. Meanwhile, millions of Americans are facing a real crisis as these infections continue to rise. Zeke Miller, my friend, always great to have you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.